so there'll be people joining as we go along. I know some of the faces, but not everybody, so I will introduce myself as the Village Hall's advisor, Helena Stubbs for Rural Action Derbyshire. I've been here about 19 years, so my face is probably quite well known around parish councils and village hall committees, but it's a pleasure to be here to support you, especially through the pandemic and the strange restrictions and lockdown restrictions that we're going through at the moment. So I don't want to say a great deal to start with, apart from the format of the session today. We're going to run through till about 12 o'clock. If it goes over, we are available to stay a little bit longer. So if there are more questions than we can fit in during the time, we are quite happy to stay a little bit longer. But that just depends whether you've got to go and finish at 12 o'clock. But we're quite happy to stay and answer some questions if people have got specific questions they want to ask us. This session is part of a series of training sessions to help village halls cope with the COVID-19 situation, and it's been very kindly funded through Foundation Derbyshire. So we are very pleased that we're able to offer these free of charge to village hall committees. So we're running this series up till the end of March, the end of this financial year. So this particular session is on the roadmap to recovery. So obviously that's very much COVID-19 related. And the session is based upon a recovery package that's been developed by ANSVAR Insurance Company. And Rachel Patterson is here to deliver that session. That will take us up to coffee break this morning, about 11 o'clock. She will run through the whole package and explain how the tools and resources and templates and things that they've developed will be something that you can take away and use with your own village hall committees. So there will be the opportunities to ask questions to Rachel about the roadmap to recovery. Ideally, if you can leave that till the end of the session, so that we can collate the questions and ask those questions all together. After coffee break, we're then going to show a short video, which was recorded during Village Halls Week at a session that was delivered nationally. They had over 200 people joining in on that session, which again was to launch the roadmap to recovery that Rachel's going to talk about. And also they showed this 15-minute a live presentation from David Christie from ANSVAR, and that was to do with the issues of water and flooding and the insurance implications with that. So that is actually going to be a recording. David isn't going to be live delivering that. Also, we're very, very happy that Martyn Ingram is joining us from Norris and Fisher. So whether some of you have already got your insurance policies with Norris and Fisher, there may be some of you that do. Martyn Ingram is the managing director of Norris and Fisher. So we're very happy, very pleased that he's joining us from the coffee break. So if you've got any specific questions, whether it's to do with the water and the flooding issues, but it could be any insurance issues. Martyn's had over 40 years experience in the insurance industry, so he is really an expert, and we're very pleased that he's joining us, and he'll be able to answer any insurance related questions. After that, then I'll just do a very quick presentation myself, which is more of a generic role of insurance and village halls and the role of village hall trustees. So that's the format of the morning. So having said all of that, I'm going to pass it over to Rachel. She's a senior risk management surveyor for Ecclesiastical Insurance, which is part of the ANSVAR group. and Rachel's going to very kindly explain this really useful tool that village halls can use to help them recover from COVID. So I will then now pass you over to Rachel.
Thank you, Helena. Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
I'm just going to share my presentation with you, first of all. So hopefully you can all see that. Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat to let me know that you can see. Okay, brilliant. Wonderful. Okay, so yes, thank you for having me today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Following on from our presentation last week, it was really well received, so I'm really excited to be able to present to you today. As Helena says, my name is Rachel Patterson, Senior Risk Management Surveyor for Ecclesiastical. I'm coming to you from a very, very snowy Newcastle upon Tyne today. It's like a winter wonderland. But I've actually, for the last 12 years, in another part of my life, spent quite a lot of time working in Derbyshire, working with and supporting the Chatsworth estate. So I do tend to spend quite a bit of time in your neck of the woods. A lot of nights in the Premier Inn in Matlock. Wonderful area, and in fact, for my 40th birthday a couple of years ago, my friends decided to take me to the RHS garden show at Chatsworth, so I spent even more time there, but some very happy memories nonetheless. So as I said, I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited to come and speak to you today in partnership with Norris and Fisher Insurance Brokers. Some of you already use the chat function. There is a little bit of interactivity as we go through the presentation, and there will come a point where I ask you to share your comments in the chat function. So again, if anybody can just give me an emoji, a hello, anything else you would like to say in the chat function now, so I know that you all can sort of comfortable using it, that would be great. Hello, Andrew. Hello, Steve. Hi, Kath. All good. Brilliant. Okay. So let's get started then. Next slide. Okay, so just a little bit of an agenda as to what we're going to cover today. Obviously, there's an introduction. We're going to touch upon the impacts of the pandemic. I think we've all felt that over the last year. We're going to ask the question, how did you sleep at night? We're going to touch upon the concept of good governance, and then how enterprise risk management is part of good governance. We're then going to consider the kind of risks that are being faced in the charity sector at the moment. And then I will go on to our roadmap to recovery, which is, as Helena has said, is a toolkit to help set you on the right track to recovery and thrive in your new normal. And at the end, there'll be the opportunity to ask some questions. So we'll just kick off. So the first thing that I wanted to say today is that I think, as a nation, we owe village halls a great deal of thanks. It's really important to acknowledge the key role that you've played in keeping the country going during the pandemic. By continuing to provide key services, perhaps as your food hygiene banks, blood donation services, and where you can, childcare for essential and key workers. And the good work now continues with, I know, some village halls becoming vaccination centers and supporting the national effort to help this horrible virus. But obviously, as we all know, this isn't a new thing, and village halls have long been the lifeblood of their communities, and they've always stepped up in challenging times to support their communities. But I guess you all know that already. But nonetheless, there was quite a poignant quote in the English Village and Community Hall Survey 2020. The enforced closure of public spaces is still expected to have a significant impact on your hall's income and activities for some time. And I was thinking about this. There are obviously a lot of activities that have been able to keep on going to support your communities, but things like your local organisations, coffee mornings, teas, lunch club, we can't underestimate the importance of these social interactions. And there's other things like family events, children's birthday parties, keep fit classes, arts and crafts, groups, exhibition, concepts, and all of these have a positive impact on the well-being of the community. And it's just such a shame that, you know, these things haven't been able to continue during this crisis that we've all faced. So, as a committee member or trustee of your village hall, did you get a good night's sleep last night? Were any of these questions going through your mind? You know, what kind of things are sort of keeping you awake at the moment? What worries you in terms of, you know, your village hall and its perhaps its survival? So feel free to share your thoughts in the chat on this. It would be great. So some of the things that we thought that you know, you might be asking yourselves, you know, will we achieve our mission? Are we making informed decisions? Like a baby. Will we deliver on our plans? You know, are our risks under control? Are we maximising our opportunities? Or do our hall users and community feel like we're serving them well? So we gave this some thought. And we came up with perhaps some things that you know, that you might think about, you might worry about. So for example, funding. I think funding is an issue for everybody. Okay, Steve, will people be confident to come back to events? Absolutely. There was quite an interesting point raised in the seminar last week, actually, where people were concerned that they could open to some extent, but their numbers were always going to be restricted. But also, you know, I think you're right, Steve. You know, I think there is a degree of fear, a degree of reticence for people at the moment. You know, people have spent so much time indoors, away from people. I think it is something that plays on people's minds. As Andrew say, we are taking the opportunity of enforced closure for a strategic review of our purpose. Excellent. That is wonderful to hear. Well, hopefully this will help you. So there's things on this slide here, things we thought about. And Andrew, I think this is quite poignant for you know, diversification, competitions from nearby towns, falling demand, engaging the next generation of volunteers is quite a big one. And other things, you know, maintenance, will we have enough money to look after our hall? How do we stay relevant in our new normal? Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm sure governance is something that you have all come across. What Sally said, we're taking this downtime to perform essential maintenance. Excellent. I think that's an excellent use of the time. So good governance. As I was saying, this is something which I think, you know, people will be quite familiar with, perhaps in other parts of your life, perhaps as you know, you will be aware of the importance of governance as a trustee of your village hall. So what is governance? I think good governance can help answer some questions and help you actually get a better night's sleep. Governance in simple terms is a process of decision making, and it can help you decide which actions you take and which actions you shouldn't take. Good governance is at the heart of maintaining your legal and ethical standing in the eyes of your regulators, customers and your wider community. And enterprise risk management is actually part of good governance. And it basically is a structure or a framework which helps you to do the right thing or helps you to make sure that you are making some good decisions. So let's just consider enterprise risk management a little bit more for a second. So the Institute of Risk Management define it as an integrated and joined up approach to managing risk across an organisation and its extended network. So that's kind of quite corporate sounding, quite business-like. But some people actually find it easier if you replace the word enterprise with strategic. Enterprise risk management is actually about looking at risk universally and holistically across sort of your whole organisation, your whole charity. And in times of greater complexity and uncertainty, and in an evolving environment and something which is constantly changing where we currently find ourselves, traditional risk management approach sometimes isn't enough. So let's just take a look at the difference between the two. So traditional risk management is something that is a key discipline in insurance. And it is perhaps better described actually as loss prevention. It primarily focuses on insurable risks, so things like fire, theft, health and safety risks, and tends to look at risks more in isolation. It is sometimes a little bit more of a reactive process and happens sporadically, and it's looking to control losses and control sort of claims, and tends to be quite risk averse with a reluctance to take risks. Whereas enterprise risk management aims to look at risk from a more strategic, universal and holistic point of view, with a focus on identifying those barriers which could stop you from achieving your mission. It still includes all those other hazards and the insurable risks, but it's taking a wider view of things. So it includes uninsurable risks, for example, funding, perhaps the risks associated with a building project, reputational risk and that kind of thing. It's more multidimensional in nature, and it looks at both the impact and the likelihood and makes connections between the risks. They're all interdependent after all. It seeks to be proactive, dynamic and continuous, and isn't a one-off, it's an ongoing process. Okay, so this all sounds wonderful, I'm sure I hear you all sort of say, but how does it benefit us? What actually are the benefits to us as an organisation? So it enables you to understand your key risks and actually consider the upside of risk and discover new opportunities. It should hopefully inform your decision making and provide greater assurance. And ultimately, it should give you more peace of mind and help you get that better night's sleep. So let's just bring things to life a little bit more for a second. This is some of the results from the Ecclesiastical Charity Respirometer 2020. This is an annual report which canvassed 252 senior charity leaders. And this insight indicates that survival for the next 6 months is more important to charities than planning for the next 5 years. And I think that's really quite a poignant observation to make. Another interesting observation is that with increased demand on services, there is a real risk of employee or volunteer burnout. And interestingly, the 2020 report suggests an increased focus on the importance of good governance. In previous years, this was considered a longer term concern. However, in 2020, respondents recognise that this is something which needs more urgent attention and actually probably needs to be placed higher up on their list of priorities now. The COVID-19 pandemic is another key risk which has had a significant impact, and that it can't be underestimated. I feel like I'm stating the obvious when I say that it's had such an impact on everybody. And I think at some point we've all stepped back and thought to ourselves, did we really see this coming? Interesting. Well, the risks of pandemic flu and other emerging infectious diseases have been identified and included on our National Risk Register since it was established in 2008. It's always been there since it's been a public document, which is something you can find for yourselves on the gov.uk website. You will see that it has been on there for the last 12, 13 years. And perhaps a question to think about is, did our government, as a nation, did we underestimate the impact that this would have? They had it down as a 1 in 100 years possibility. Just something to ponder on, and I would encourage you to take a look at the National Risk Register. If this is the kind of thing that floats your boat, it certainly floats my boat because I'm a little bit of a nerd like that. When you're looking at your own plans and your own risk registers and your own planning for the future, it's just quite an interesting read. Was the risk of enforced lockdown closure the scenario planning? Let me read that again, sorry. Was the risk of enforced lockdown closure on that scenario planning in the flu pandemic risk register entry? Well, I don't think it was. Interesting, isn't it? Perhaps we weren't prepared. So as I say, it's a public document. You can access it on gov.uk. You know, it might be helpful, or you might just find it to be an interesting read. So nonetheless, I mean, it's easy to sort of think about, could we, you know, whose fault is this? How did this happen? But really what we probably should be thinking is, you know, what's next? How can we resume? How can we rebuild and recover? And how do we move forward? Okay. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to the roadmap to recovery. Using the principles of enterprise risk management and a strategic risk-based approach, we have created our roadmap to recovery. This is basically a simple planning framework which is intended to help your village hall recover from the impact of COVID-19. It sets out simple steps to support your return to the new normal while keeping risk and opportunity at the front of your mind. The roadmap has 3 areas of focus, 4 key checklists, and 5 strategic steps. So just think 3, 4, 5. So the templates relating to this will be made available to you today after today's session. So there's 8 in total, but the first one I would recommend that you look at is the overview, which walks you through the process. But let's just take a look at each stage for now. So 3 areas of focus will help you to take a step back and look at your priorities, activities, and staff and volunteers so that you can consider the impact that the pandemic has had on your village hall. The impact review template walks you through key questions to understand what has happened, what it was or what the impact was, and where there might be opportunities and what the risks were. So example of these, the key questions are, what functions or activities were impacted? What were the financial impacts or benefits to your organisation? And what were the non-financial impacts or benefits? Did you identify any opportunities? And what action did you take to manage them? I know that it seems that it's quite a business-like sort of approach to take an impact assessment, but I heard something the other day, and the way of approaching a business impact assessment is to think of it as a way of telling your story. Tell the story about what has happened to your village hall. I think that's a really nice way of putting this, you know, trying to make things more digestible and easier for people. It's about telling the story of what happened since, you know, we all went into lockdown last March. So I hope that's helpful. So then let's move on to the 4 key checklists. So there's four there. There's one on governance and risk, one on finance, one on your hall users and wider community, and one for information technology. And the best approach is to get together with your fellow committee members, share your impact review that you've done, and then work through as a group and complete the questions from these checklists. We've worked very hard to make these user-friendly and understandable, and hopefully you will find that it takes you through in quite a simple and logical process. And hopefully this will reveal what you have is currently in place and what action is actually possible. Okay. And finally, these are our 5 strategic steps. So this stage of the approach takes the information you have gathered from your impact review and your checklists and puts it in a wider, more strategic or universal context. So these further questions help you with your plans for recovery. So let's look at these. These are the 5 Ps: position, perspective, plan, projects, and preparedness. So position, you know, what is your position now within the wider community? Take some time to think about perspective. Has the landscape changed for your village hall? Think about your plans. What will you do and what must you do? Think about the projects that you might have. What elements of your plan require greater attention? And finally, preparedness. How prepared are you for the next potential disruption? So hopefully that's been helpful. And so just by way of a quick recap, you know, think 3, 4, 5. You've got your 3 areas of focus: priorities, halls, activities, and staff and volunteers. Your 4 key checklists and your 5 strategic steps. And by working through the impact review, looking at your checklists, and considering the questions in the 5 strategic steps, you should be in a position to plan for the future. And there's 2 final templates. So there is a short-term action plan, which you can use to capture your plans. And then there is a very, very simple risk register, which you can use to record any risks that may prevent you from achieving your plans. So it seems like it's quite a lot of work. And like I said, we've worked really hard to try and make these as simple to use as possible. There are example questions, and when you look at the templates, you will see that there are hopefully some prompts which will help you along the way. Okay, and that's it. I've perhaps galloped through that somewhat. So I'm happy to answer any questions now. What I can possibly do is share an example of one of the checklists, if you would like to see that, but happy to take any questions. What would you like?
I think that would be useful, Rachel, to actually see what is actually in the package, because I mean, obviously I've seen it and I've printed off copies of it, and it can be a little bit, to be honest, it can be slightly confusing to start with. So I think to sort of talk through what each template, you know, the process to follow, and how information from the first template will feed into the second one. I think that might be quite useful.
Okay, so as I said, there is an overview document which does walk you through it. And as I said, that I would recommend that you read that first. And I appreciate it does seem like quite a lot of work, but hopefully as you work through it, you will see that it is actually quite logical. But let me just try and share. Let me have a look. We'll go for this one. So can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the checklist and the questions to ask yourself as part of considering your whole users and community. So it takes you through hopefully a journey. So thinking about, you know, in business continuity and enterprise risk management terms, we use the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the people who, and I apologize if people know what stakeholders are, but people who sort of a key stake: customers, staff and volunteers, people who care about what you do, essentially. So it you know, runs through, have you got a plan for communicating with your whole users and communities? Have you kept them up to date on any significant changes? You know, have you identified how you could improve your response to any future crises, including the communications? Employees and volunteers, you know, again, it takes you through, have you kept your staff and volunteers up to date? Have you identified who is critical to keep key services running? Have you identified people who are critical to perhaps restart other parts of your activities? Have you identified where people maybe need some more skills, for example, digital skills? Do you need to attract new people to help fill this gap? Have you considered new ways of working? Can you reinvent and deliver any of your activities in a different way? Have you considered new ways of supporting, you know, your community? And are there opportunities to work more closely with others who may operate in your building, for example, a playgroup, a nursery, a social club, that kind of thing? So that's an example of the whole users and community checklist. And I think I've got another one open. This one. So this is the information technology checklist. And again, as you can see, it takes you through, you know, it splits off into different categories, some very simple question sets. So for example, let's have a look. Were you working remotely or flexibly? I think many of us were. Do you prefer this way of working? Has it worked well? in thinking about sort of information that is critical to your activities. Do you keep that digitally? Do you rely on the use of committee or staff home computing devices? Have you considered the adequacy of the security controls? Do you use social media? Do you have a website? Do you use Zoom? Clearly everybody does today. So hopefully it's using these checklists as a way of teasing out some ideas and things that you may or may not have thought about, helping you start to think about, you know, what you can do next and what the opportunities are that are involved with that. Okay, let's see what's.
I think because all village halls and all committees have had to start using information technology so much more during the lockdowns. Again, that's got an implication on insurance, hasn't it? So if people are using their own equipment from home, or whether it's equipment that's bought by the village hall or the charity, it could be that you've had to invest in new IT equipment. So notifying the insurance company of those assets is important.
Yeah, so that would be to speak to the broker, speak to your insurance broker or your insurance company.
It's easy to sort of overlook these things, but I think it's, you know, investing in IT. I think if anything, the pandemic has highlighted the need for having ways of communicating with trustees, and it's crucial, or iPhones, whatever mechanism people are using. Lots of little charities can't afford to invest in things like this, but if you're a bigger, say, community centre, town hall, bigger organisation where you've got the finances, then investing in the IT side of things, especially moving forward, I think this has highlighted the importance that that's going to be. There's another question there, is there?
One of our key challenges as a completely new team is that no documentation was available electronically. So for us to pick up the reins has been really difficult in lockdown. Oh, absolutely. I can well imagine. I can well imagine that, you know, kind of almost starting from scratch, or not being able to go down and just sort of root through the filing cabinets and that kind of thing was just a complete nightmare. You know, where do you start? Absolutely, it's just.
I think that highlights that is actually a risk. So if you are on a committee and you're a trustee and they've not got the policies and procedures in place for recruiting and induction of new trustees, that is a high risk to that charity, because the continuity of the management and the processes and procedures is completely lost. And the new trustees might not even know what sort of governance. We're talking about governance earlier, the importance of it. It's a higher priority than it used to be. In those sort of scenarios where you've got a completely new set of volunteers taking over and they've not necessarily seen the paperwork, the minutes and the governing document, then that is a huge risk to the charity, and it puts those new trustees in a very, very difficult position. So that is, again, something that all organisations should factor into their risk management, is have we got our policies and procedures in place, including, you know, do we have how do we induct our new trustees? How do we engage with new people and get them used to the charity and so that they know what they're doing? So again, that comes, presumably, Rachel, you've got, is one of them on governance, one of the checklists?
Yes, let me just try and share that with you. The other point I was going to make, actually building upon that, is that actually, if you think about it, if there is just one person that keeps all of these things digitally on their home PC, and then, you know, even outside of pandemic time, then something happens to that hard drive and you just completely lose everything. Yeah, you know, it would be a total nightmare. Let's see if I can just find the governance for you. Okay. You just have to bear with me a second. There we go. Okay. So this is the governance checklist. So it walks you through, hopefully in a fairly simple and logical way. Asking questions, do you need to change your short-term plans? Have you considered what you need to stop, what you need to start, what you need to continue? And this kind of ties into business, so your impact analysis in a way, you know, what is absolutely essential? What do you absolutely essential have to continue with? And what things can sort of pause for the time being? That's quite an interesting question to ask yourselves. You know, how do you need to adapt to deliver your priorities? Are there any other checks that you need to put in place? Do you need to report more frequently to people? Do you have a framework in place to manage risks? Do you have processes in place to identify, manage and report on risks, incidents and hazards? Have you identified any new risks, any new opportunities? And are you actively managing these and taking advantage of your new opportunities? And then at the bottom there, sort of legal considerations. Has anything changed again? Are you clear on what regulatory changes that may affect your whole activities? Again, you know, so this is quite interesting. You know, earlier in the chat, someone was saying about people being scared to come back, or perhaps reticent to come back to sort of the on-site activities. And, you know, the sort of the COVID secure regulations are something which ties quite nicely into this. You know, COVID secure is something which should hopefully build confidence in people. You know, we have done some COVID secure risk assessments so we can carry on in our job, you know, sort of going out to see customers. And it is something that is quite important to consider in order so people feel that they can come back. Other questions? Do you need to update your insurance? Do you need to speak to your insurance broker? I'll stop sharing that one, and then I may as well just, what was the last one? Finance. We'll have a quick look at the finance one as well. Just bear with me, apologise.
Yeah, I mean, it says here somebody's put Save Cloud is the answer to IT filing, yes. But you know, a lot of committees in village halls are perhaps elderly people. They may not have the IT skills, so I see that as a risk. And I think a lot of committees, one of the biggest challenges is getting the right skills on the committee and trying to engage some younger people to join in, because again, a lot of people may have been on the committee for, you know, 10, 20, 30 years. I know of a lady that's been on a village hall committee for over 50 years. She's in her 90s. And she seems to be the main person still running that particular charity. She wouldn't know probably what, you know, the cloud is, probably still doing things by pen and paper. So you can't assume that everybody is IT literate or has the equipment. And it is a huge challenge for village halls unless they can try and find a way of engaging new people. Recruiting new trustees, and that's actually the focus of our next training session. But I think a lot of charities, it's been highlighted as a key challenge following the, you know, the pandemic, that one of the key challenges is going to be trustee burnout. People have had so much stress and strain during coping with the lockdown and the restrictions, and I think the fact that they are changing on such regular basis, and trustees are having to keep up to date with what they can and can't do, and what's going to happen next. Actually going through all of this, people are getting very, very tired and very, very, you know, almost this burnout feeling about the whole thing. So the challenge probably that when we come out is that who is then going to pick up and almost restart? It's almost like reinventing the village hall, reevaluating what it's going to provide, what it's there for the community. And I think this toolkit and these templates that Rachel, you know, that we've been talking about is a good way. When we're looking at risks, we're also looking at the opportunities. It's trying to sit down and think, okay, we're in this state. It's analysing what you've got, what your offer is, what your village hall provides, but then looking at the opportunities. So in a way, the lockdown is providing this quite quiet time in a way, a pause to completely reevaluate what the future is going to be and who potentially you can get involved. So you may be fearing that groups are not going to be returning, which I think is a big fear. Looking at maybe what's going to be the wider market, how can we provide a wider variety of activities and look at new opportunities. It could be that you could perhaps get more, if you've got a spare room that's not being used, or a spare small hall, side room, and it's not going to be used, could it possibly be let out for an office space? Because I think more and more people are going to want to work locally, work from home. It could be like a hot desk for businesses.
Yeah, I was going to say that. There's an opportunity to provide hot desking services,
Yeah. I mean, that's not a charitable purpose, so you couldn't use that as the main focus for your main hall, but it's only if you've got spare capacity and a small room that's never used. Can you capitalise on that? Can you look at a way, it's an opportunity whereby, as you say, people are perhaps going to want to work locally. There are a lot more businesses wanting to set up, and they may need a bit of storage space, or somewhere where they can use to package things. And again, if there's capacity in your building that is definitely not used, and you're not preventing community groups from using the hall, you can use the hall for limited business use, but it's looking at what those possibilities could be. Obviously, there's a lot of information you'd have to know about that sort of thing, and we can provide that. So we're not going to talk about the ins and outs of that. That's an example of an opportunity that you may not have thought about in the past. And it's down to the committee to try and, it's like brainstorming, isn't it, Rachel?
It is,
in a way.
it's like a fancy brainstorm.
Brainstorming, okay, yeah, come up with ideas.
It's telling your story about what has happened and then brainstorming from that. And the checklists are there to sort of help you along the way and consolidate your thoughts.
That's a strategic part, isn't it, really? Yeah. It's like imagining now in 6 months' time, imagine there's no COVID, we're back to normal, there's no social distancing. It's blue sky thinking, how do you envisage your hall? What would you like your hall to be? And if you can identify what your limitations are, what you can and couldn't possibly do, identify maybe what your new markets could be, how you can reach those new markets. So have we got to come up with a marketing plan? How can we better communicate what we can offer to groups and businesses and households who want to have events or weddings, parties, and then identifying what it is you need to put in place to get to that ideal, COVID-free world, what you need to do to get there. And often it is something like improving your marketing, widening your reach, trying to involve younger people in the organisation. So it's these templates will basically help you do that and help you to get there.
Yeah, and I do acknowledge.
And another thing that is.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I was going to say, I do acknowledge that.
I'm going on a bit, right?
It's okay.
Another bit. Communication. I've found through the last 19, 20 years working in community engagement that communication is often key to getting people involved. So if your community, for example, doesn't know that you're struggling, doesn't know that you're looking out for new people to be on the committee or particular skills, it's your job really to communicate that. Keep people, almost like if you had a blog or a social media, to sort of keep that story that Rachel was saying in your what was the first thing? Not the risk, the impact review stage. Yeah, if you can identify what your story is, but maybe to communicate that story, you know, we are really struggling and we've found that, you know, and just sort of be honest and open about it with your local community. Tell that story as you, because we're still going through the story, of course, because we don't know what the next stage is going to be. You don't know when you're going to be open. We don't know what, you know, the numbers are allowed into your hall will be, what the social distancing will be. Just be honest about that. And I think communicate it as you go along. And you'll be surprised then maybe that you know, it's engaging people, and then hopefully they will be ready to come back and make use and support you. That's the key thing, is that you're not isolated. You are part of that community. You want to be supported by your community. So communications now, not just when you reopen, is and part of this process. So I hope that
a good idea is, you know, if you are doing sort of making changes to the hall, if you're redecorating, renovating, that's a story again for your social media, and that's a story perhaps to tell your community and the wider community about. Did you know that we're doing this? We're taking our time so we can be here for you when, you know, when we can reopen. And people might think, oh well, it's, you know, it's my son or daughter's birthday, or, you know, the thing. We could consider, you know, now it's the hall's been redecorated and spruced up, you know, it'd be really, really nice to have our birthday parties there. Or it's just sort of being more proactive, I guess is what you're saying, Helena, you know, about, and telling people about what you're doing. And
yeah, I think it is proactive, because we can't, don't think groups can assume that people know the problems and the issues that you are dealing with. They perhaps think that once the lockdowns, you know, COVID is over, that things just automatically go back to normal. Well, they don't automatically go back to normal. It's people engaged, people involved, people supporting that make things happen. And I think, again, that's going back to what's the opportunity in the future. There is actually going to be this huge feeling of people wanting to get together, which, you know, a lot more than it was, you know, pre-COVID. We can't quite imagine what people are going to feel, but you can imagine that all they will want to do is to grab the opportunity of every opportunity to socialise, to mix with other people, be more community minded. I think that might be an outcome of COVID, and it's happening now, isn't it? People are helping their neighbours a lot more. People are knowing people in their village that they haven't met before. So that's that opportunity side of it, is that people are going to be better integrated. So they're perhaps more likely to want to socialise, because communities are going to be better, you know each other a lot better. So again, these are the opportunities. How do you capitalise on that? And another way, another opportunity is, when you can, is to when we talk about reevaluate, is to have a sort of a consultation or an open event at the hall to say, look, what is it that you would like us to do? What is it that you would like us, you know, have just a blank sheet type of thing, starting afresh. This is your hall, it belongs to the community. What would you like to see happen? What type of activities do you see this hall providing? It isn't up to the committee to provide the activities, obviously, you know, but it might trigger off or identify what new groups could start up in that local community. I think it's very much starting anew, and people may have new needs for socialising. It might be book clubs, it could be, any sort of activity. So it's not necessarily going to reopen in the same way as it was pre-COVID. So I think that's a great opportunity. Very hard work, but again, involving the community and asking them, because I think it's almost your community has changed, isn't it? Because everybody's mindset is slightly different. So capitalise on that and get people to think, okay, we've got this facility. People are so used to actually not getting in the car and driving to the local sports centre. They might think, well, actually, I don't want to get in the car and drive 5-6 miles to the local town. I'd much rather be able to just walk down the road into the village hall and access these activities there. So again, that's an opportunity to sort of grasp people while they're in this more staying at home mindset. That's how I see that the whole committees have got to think slightly differently than the way they did before. So I hope that's helpful, but the templates and Rachel's, the roadmap templates will be very helpful for village hall committees to strategically, even if you don't use all of them. Am I right in saying that, Rachel?
I mean,
even if
they're yours, you do what you want with them. They're meant as a starting point. You can amend them. You know, they're sort of very generic, and I totally appreciate that each individual village hall is going to have its own considerations, its own needs, different things. You can, you know, do what you want with them. They're yours. And if you do something really fabulous and something really great with them, I'd love to hear about it. Actually, you know, if you evolve them into something better, I would love to know about that, because I'm always here for continuous improvement. So I'd love to know how you've taken it and what you've done with it. You know, if you found it particularly successful, I would love to know about that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see what's in the chat here.
There's a couple of questions pertaining to insurance, which I think might be best saved for Martyn.
Yeah.
When he arrives. I think this is an interesting comment from Andrew. A key risk I have now experienced twice in voluntary organisations that I'm now part of is a long-term sitting committee. Committees have taken a one leaves, we all leave approach to succession planning. Not deliberately, just what has happened. Succession process needs to be managed really proactively and on an ongoing basis to avoid cliff edge. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, our next session is on inducting new trustees. So there'll be information about that as well, if anybody's interested in that. But it is crucial and it is part of good governance. So, but things like emergency planning, I don't know if halls have been involved with any local emergency plans that maybe the parish council that have been involved with. But you look at things like flooding, severe cases of snow, or people being cut off, and when the Whaley Bridge, was it last year, the dam nearly went at Whaley Bridge, the local community centre there was used very much as the emergency centre, and people had to sleep overnight actually in the community centre. So again, it may be looking at, when you're looking at opportunities, have you engaged maybe with your local emergency planning officer, saying, look, we are an isolated community, or we're in a floodplain, please can we engage with you that we may be needed, or if we were to be needed as an emergency centre in the future. Again, it's looking at those opportunities, not that you want to be in that situation, but it's thinking very broadly of the role that the village hall plays within the community and the wider community. Right, we are about 5 to 11, Rachel. So any more questions that... Yeah, a lot to do with, yeah.
Andrew says, yes, the templates are going to be very useful as we are going through our strategic review process. Fantastic. I am so glad to hear that. Kath says, thank you. This has been really helpful. I really hope so. I would love to hear about how things progress for you all.
Yeah. We will be sending that. They will be made available, not straight today after the event, but when Emma gets the slides and all the post-event information, there will be a link to access all of these templates, but I don't think that will actually be today. So just be a little bit patient with us.
It probably won't be.
Everyone's so excited to receive them. It's wonderful.
Okay, so we'll have a 10-minute coffee break, if that's okay. Rachel, are you stopping this afternoon? You're very welcome. Not this afternoon, after coffee. Up to you.
I'll stay for the next hour. Yeah, I'll stay and listen in.
Only if you want to. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we'll have if we have a 10-minute break maximum, and then we'll go straight into showing you the video from David Christie, which is to do with damage and water risk, which is a pre-recording. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. So that's really nice. So the second session, I shall introduce Martyn Ingram for those that are not familiar with Norris and Fisher insurance brokers. Norris and Fisher do one of the major bespoke village hall policies. There are 4 or 5 companies, I'm not sure now actually if it's less than that, that do bespoke village hall policies, and we always recommend that village halls choose a policy like that, because you can be more confident that it is tailored to the specific circumstances, risks and needs of village hall committees and community buildings. So we've got Martyn joining us for the second session to answer any questions and anything that may arise. Anything, it doesn't have to be to do with the recovery of COVID. It could be anything, any issue relating to insurance affecting your village hall. So actually with the next session, we're just going to show a clip for about 15 minutes now that was pre-recorded during Village Halls Week at a similar event, an online event there. So this was delivered by David Christie, who is from ANSVAR, and it was to do with the issues and the impact of water damage to village halls. So I think, because we can't ask David, it's a recording, if there's any issues and questions that arise from the recording, then Martyn will be well placed to answer any of those questions. So is that okay? So Emma, if we start the video.
Yeah, just if anybody can't see it or can't hear it, I hope I've got the tech right, but just pop something in the chat. I'll fire away now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining me today. I'm David Christie from ANSVAR Insurance, and this presentation is in conjunction with one of our key partners, Norris and Fisher Insurance Brokers, on loss prevention. The agenda for this morning will give you a brief history of my company, ANSVAR Insurance, an overview of Norris and Fisher Insurance Brokers, a look at how water damage occurs and the impact it can have on village halls, actions which collectively can be taken to mitigate the potential impact of water damage at your village hall, a little on the importance of ensuring your insurance policy protects your hall adequately, and of course the opportunity for any questions you may have. So ANSVAR are an insurance company based in Eastbourne in East Sussex. We specialise in charity, not-for-profit and faith insurance. We've been insuring those that help and support others for over 60 years, and our range of solutions available through our network of broker partners are designed to support and protect our customers and their assets. Unlike most insurance companies, ANSVAR are owned by All Churches Trust, a charity in its own right who have no shareholders seeking dividends from the profits we make. All of those profits we achieve go back to our owner, who in turn redistributes these profits to charitable causes. Norris and Fisher are independent insurance brokers based in Chandler's Ford near Southampton. They are chartered insurance brokers. This is the industry's gold standard for an insurance broker, and the qualification means they must provide advice of the highest quality. Norris and Fisher specialise in insurance for charities and community buildings. They offer a tailored insurance policy for village halls through their special scheme underwritten by ANSVAR, which was established in 2007. The provision of first-class service is their absolute priority, with a dedicated village halls team. Okay, let's have a look at loss prevention in the context of water. When people see lots of water in a property, they might assume it's a flood, but there's a technical difference between flooding and escape of water in insurance terms. From an insurer's perspective, flooding comes from an external source, which impacts a building. This could be a natural event, such as a sea surge or a river bursting its banks, or a man-made cause, like a burst water main or maybe blocked road drains. Whereas escape of water causing damage to a property comes from an internal source, be it a burst pipe, a faulty appliance, or maybe internally blocked drains, which can be really nasty to resolve. So let's have a look at escape of water in a little detail. Even small leaks can cause significant problems. The tiniest of ruptures can potentially release large amounts of water into a property. According to the Association of British Insurers, a claim relating to a burst pipe costs an average of nearly £9,000 to resolve and put right. This average figure applies to both household and commercial premises, which can be a little bit misleading. If you just look at commercial premises, particularly those that are not necessarily actively used every day, the damage and costs to rectify are often much higher. Now, an escape of water will cause damage which can be seen, generally to ceilings, walls, floors, and contents within the structure, all of which can hopefully be repaired or replaced, but the consequences can be far wider. An undiscovered escape of water over a period of time could lead to subsidence of the building, which may end up requiring underpinning to remedy. And of course, the village hall on which the community depends may not be available for a period of time following an escape of water whilst repairs are made. During this period of reinstatement, income for the village hall will be lost as it's unavailable for use. If, as a management or trustees board, you have the option to temporarily use another premises whilst the village hall is repaired, it may be an ideal solution to maintain income and support the community. However, I suspect there'll be a rental cost, which will need to be found either from current funds or insurance if the cover is in place. Essentially, a lot of hassle, disruption, and cost everyone could do without, as it just becomes a distraction from your objectives and aspirations for the community. In some form or another, we pretty much all buy and have insurance of some description, be it car insurance, which is a legal requirement, travel cover for our holidays when we're able to, or full commercial cover for our village hall or business. Insurance is a risk transfer mechanism designed to put the policyholder back into the same position as they were prior to damage caused by an insured event. After all, accidents happen, weather events happen, and malicious damage occurs. We can confidently predict situations are going to arise which will cause damage and injury, but hopefully you'll all agree anything which can be done to prevent and mitigate the possibility of these events occurring is far better than having to deal with the outcome as a result. Now, I'm sure we can all associate with some, if not all, of the common incidents which give rise to escape of water issues. I'll be honest with you, I'm built like a rugby front row forward from 40 years ago, not quite as agile and sculptured as those playing today. The memories of crawling through a tight ceiling hatch into a small loft space, desperately trying to stop water flowing out of a burst pipe which was pouring into my kitchen, is not something I'd want to repeat. And whilst due to my reputation, my wife put severe restrictions on the DIY I'm allowed to undertake, we've also suffered the consequences from modern plumbing joints which have failed and blocked drainage pipes in the past which have caused escape of water issues. Thankfully, none of my personal experiences have caused major damage to my property. Unfortunately, the same can't be said in many other examples. When I look at the results for just the village hall's ANSVAR insured in 2020, there were numerous escapes of water claims reported with an average settlement of nearly £15,000 to make good and repair the properties. In a world where many village halls have become unoccupied for long periods due to the pandemic, there are steps which can be taken to manage the risk. As a parish councillor myself, and acknowledging community volunteers continue to undertake weekly, if not daily, checks of the building, unless there is an intention to actively use the village hall on a regular basis, such as using it as a business hub, it may be worth considering draining the water tanks down and turning off the mains electricity supply. Effectively, this absolutely minimises the possibility of an escape of water with the consequential damage to the building and its electrics. Other top tips to think about may include learning to identify frozen pipes. In our experience, one of the most common oversights is ignoring frozen pipes until it's too late. If the water supply has slowed down to a trickle, if water is coming out ice cold, or if your taps and faucets are giving off a strange odour, suggesting there's a blockage a blockage caused by frozen water, pipes need to be checked for frost. Heating any frozen areas with a hairdryer or a space heater can help get water flowing normally again. Insulating exposed pipes. One of the best ways to prevent burst pipes is to insulate them with pipe wrap or insulating tape. The most important areas to focus on are the weaker parts of the pipes, such as the joints. In particular, exposed pipes, such as those running along exterior walls and in the roof and basements, need to be protected. Disabling the water supply in an unoccupied village hall. It may not be desirable always to turn off the mains electric if your hall's not being used for the foreseeable future, as you may need it for heating or the security alarm system. However, from a risk perspective, it's always safest to shut off the water supply while no one's around. That way, if a pipe bursts, the damage will be negligible. And take action to prevent water pipes from becoming blocked. Service users of your hall should be reminded that only toilet paper should be disposed of down the toilet, and only water should be poured down external drains. Using signage in the facilities and providing drain protectors for sinks can help avoid blocked pipes in your village hall. As I'm sure many of you experience, dealing with the consequences of blocked toilets and drains is not a pleasant experience. Now, let's have a look at flood in the context of insurance. Climate change is bringing increasingly prolonged periods of wet weather. The development of land creating more hard-standing services, along with property development on floodplains, has led to reductions in land drainage capacity, which in turn leads to a build-up of surface water in periods of wet weather, which has nowhere to drain to. The cost of Storm Christoph 2 weeks ago have been estimated at £120 million. And whilst the majority of flooding seen emanated from established watercourses, there were many areas where flash flooding occurred some distance from a river or stream as drainage systems became overwhelmed. Flash flooding can occur in areas which have no previous history of floods. It can be hard to predict, can arrive very quickly, and generally disperses in a short period of time. But it always leaves plenty of evidence of the damage it causes for everyone affected to deal with. Living in a small village in a valley in northwest Hampshire, we're 4 miles from the nearest watercourse and had a very low threat of flash flooding despite being in the valley. In 2014, following a stormy January preceded by a wet summer and autumn, flash flooding caused significant damage to a number of properties in the village, leaving residents out of at least a dozen houses for close to a year. The village hall survived the devastation caused by a matter of centimetres, as it was on a slightly higher gradient to the properties on either side, which both flooded through. It was a very close call. In spring 2014, as the village recovered from the impact of the flood, the parish council, along with other relevant parties, developed a robust flood plan, which is reviewed regularly to ensure it's fit for purpose, includes actions to mitigate the risks of flooding, and ensures residents and property are as well protected as possible. Of course, if we'd known then what we know now, the flood plan would have been in place long before 2014. Following our village's experience in 2014, collectively the parish has undertaken mitigating actions, including all of those you can see on the slide, to directly protect properties, including the village hall. I must take the opportunity to emphasise the need to use plastic sheeting as a barrier with sandbags. One of the few humorous moments from my experience in 2014 came when around 50 Navy personnel arrived in the village to lay 2,500 sandbags, but they didn't use any plastic sheeting. Needless to say, the flood water just flowed straight on through before washing away the sandbags away completely in just a few hours. Appreciating there is a cost in taking risk prevention measures, these costs are relatively minimal in comparison to the damage, disruption, and ultimately price, both in monetary and mental health terms, of being impacted by floods. And of course, there are general maintenance activities which should be considered by Village Hall Committee and volunteers, and in conjunction with others. Part of the problem, and therefore causation, in 2014 was silted up drains which hadn't been cleared out for a long time, and the majority of culverts and gullies which had become overgrown and blocked with debris. As noted earlier, we didn't have a flood plan either, as the likelihood of a flood even from surface water was negligible. After all, we had no previous history of flooding, and it was considered a 1 in 100-year event according to the Environment Agency. Now we have a flood plan. We've engaged with the Highways Agency, who have a maintenance plan to ensure road drains are kept clear, and we've built relationships with local landowners who have taken their responsibilities around clearing and managing culverts and gullies very seriously. Essentially, the community are working for and with each other to ideally prevent or at least minimise the impact of future flooding. Insurance plays a pivotal role in protecting your assets, which of course is your village hall and the contents within. Flood, including escape of water, is generally an insured peril covered within your policy. However, there are 1 or 2 exceptions to think about. If an insurer considers your flood as higher risk than norm, it may well apply special terms on the excess which you will pay in the event of a claim. A standard policy excess generally ranges from £100 to £350. But if in a medium to high flood risk, the excess could increase to a range from anywhere between £1,000 and £10,000, or even more dependent on the risk factors. Secondly, the majority of insurance policies exclude a gradual increase of the water table, which leads to groundwater flooding within the wording. There are 1 or 2 insurers who do extend the cover for groundwater flooding, but this is atypical and likely to be cost prohibitive. Dependent on the location of your village hall, if insurers consider the risk of flooding as high, they may choose to exclude flood cover altogether. There are now new forms of insurance known as parametric insurance, which may be able to assist the village hall who are unable to get flood cover from a normal insurance policy. If you have this as an issue, it may be worth talking to a company who operates in the area of parametric insurance, such as Flood Flash. As mentioned earlier, insurance is a risk transfer mechanism whereby indemnity is given by the insurer for the premium paid. On the basis your village hall is covered by insurance correctly with buildings and contents cover and business interruption and loss of income in place, things are looking good. However, it's vitally important to make sure you are insuring at the correct levels in terms of value and time. And this is why. The average clause sits in most insurance policy wordings and is designed to protect the insurer from underinsurance. The expectation being the correct premium is paid for the risk the insurer is underwriting. If you do not have a good understanding of the reinstatement cost and buildings valuation for your village hall, the loss of income the village hall would have in the event of a total loss, and the length of time it would take to reinstate the property, please seek advice from your insurance broker to ensure accuracy. Understated values may well lead to underinsurance, which in turn may result in lower claims payments. This could mean the village hall does not get fully repaired or rebuilt. Now, it's quite a complicated calculation when a loss adjuster applies average to a claim, as many factors have to be taken into account, which are linked to the insurer's policy wordings. These wordings are not necessarily always the same. On the screen is just a very simple example to highlight the possible consequences of not having the right level of cover in place to protect your village hall. As you can see, a significant shortfall in the amount which will be paid, which may mean the village hall struggles to recover from the catastrophe. So in summary, Prevention is far better than the cure. Assess your risk, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Take actions to mitigate and manage the risk of flooding to your village hall, and review your covers to ensure adequacy of sums insured and periods of indemnity. Thank you for your time this morning. I hope the session was of interest to you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Trying to unmute then, yeah. I feel like we need to say thank you to David, but David's not with us, so it's difficult, but as that was a recording. But I hope, you know, it was very interesting to hear that directly about the water damage and the flood risk. And I've learnt 2 new words I didn't know before, the fluvial and pluvial. They're not terminologies, words I've ever heard of before, so I did find that very interesting. So any questions that have arisen from that session? I don't think anything's come through on the chat so far. If there are any issues that have arisen to do with water, burst pipes, the cold weather, understanding what's on your insurance policy, Martyn will be only too happy to answer those questions. We don't seem to have any at the moment.
I'll just mention something, Helena, if I may then.
Yeah.
Because David in that talk mentioned making sure that the sum insured under your village hall policy is adequate. The buildings, sum insured, all of them, but particularly the buildings. One thing people might not know is that most of the providers of the tailored village hall insurance policies offer a free valuation. So it's quite easy to check whether your sum insured is suitable.
How often do you recommend that, Martyn, then, that village halls do that? Because they think perhaps they've done that, they don't have to think about it for many years to come. What's the recommended, you know, periodic review of the sum insured?
Well, sums insured are index linked, so they ought to keep pace with the increase in rebuilding costs, but certainly at least once every 5 years, possibly once every 3. As
a minimum, yeah.
Yeah.
And things that they've also got to remember to do, that if there's been any improvement work or extension work or anything that's added value to the premises, whether it's internally, externally, then obviously to remember to notify their insurance provider.
And if I could just pick up on that, can I just say something else on that subject? Because very often we get a call from a village hall who say, we're having an extension built, it starts tomorrow. And they need cover. Well, if the work is being done under a JCT type of contract, they need the village hall policy to be extended to cover the value of the building that's being put up. So I would just say, if any works are being done, notify your insurers as soon as possible. And if it's being done under a JCT contract, then that policy will have to cover the works.
Yes, there's a question come through from Steve. Should sums insured reflect if the building is a listed building or in a conservation area? Would the free valuation be able to assess those sort of issues, where they're located?
Yeah, very much so. That's part of the purpose of the valuation, so it would take that into account.
Yeah, Jeff's asking, any other policy options that should be considered on a typical policy? So that's sort of generic.
If you go for one of the tailored policies, then generally you will be offered a wide range of cover that should meet most of your requirements. You can always discuss this with your insurer or broker, but generally, as I say, the tailored policy should cover just about everything you need.
Right. Another one there's one from Kevin. If you make a claim, is it like motor inns in that premiums rise the following year? Is that right? I mean, increases, that would be.
Yeah, motor insurance. Yeah, absolutely. Usually, yes, because there's normally a no claim discount built into a village hall premium. It's not like motor in that it goes up to 60% and you get a step back. It's usually only a 10% discount, might be 15, but it's generally 10%, and you would lose that at the following year.
Right. If there's been a claim.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've not actually had to be involved with an insurance policy because I'm not actually sitting on a village hall committee. Is there an excess, and does the excess, is there a choice on excess before a village hall wants to claim on an insurance policy?
There certainly will be one, and there's often not a choice. The excess on buildings and contents will be anything from £100 to £350, usually £1,000 for subsidence. But that's built in, and that will be explained to the hall committee by the broker or insurer.
Yeah. Steve's asking, would we normally cover public liability for events separately from that in the buildings cover, or can there be a combined policy? Which is better?
Depends where the event is held and what it takes into account, because normally events held at the hall are automatically covered under the hall policy. But if you're arranging something away from the hall, you should always tell your insurer and they'll advise you, because depending upon what it is, they might want to charge additional premium for that event. But if it's just, a bring and buy sale or something, that's at the hall, that will always be covered.
And we would always treat an event away from the hall, actually advising committees to do a risk assessment on that event. So
yeah, absolutely.
Try and identify what potential risks could be, what could happen. Then you might then think, well, okay, we do need to obviously have a word with the insurance company, but as a committee, they do need to do that risk assessment as well.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So Andrew, does there need to be proof of maintenance in the event of claims for example, for flooding where drains had turned out to have been blocked?
Well, the claim would be covered regardless. So no, there doesn't have to be, although an insurer will generally want to see evidence that you've taken reasonable steps. That's more important really in a claim for liability, where someone falls over a broken step or something and sues for their injury. It's much more important to insurers then that you can evidence what you've done to try to prevent that problem, because it will help defend the case in court if it goes to court. But in answer to that particular question, it's not necessary to evidence maintenance, but it can only help.
Yeah, I think it's like any risk assessment or health and safety. Recording is usually key, isn't it, for those purposes, even though it is quite tedious to do that. But we would always recommend that anything is recorded.
And I don't know if you're aware, but we do have a risk management guide which we can send out to people, which gives them an idea of what things they should consider, and it gives a blank template for them to fill in for risk management issues. If that would be useful, I'm happy to send that around.
I think anything that's any useful guide like that is going to be helpful, Martyn. So please do. Yeah. Yes, please do. So anything like that would be really helpful. So I have prepared a few slides, which is actually quite basic, generic, about maybe more the governance side and the importance of the role of the trustees. So I can go through those quite quickly. We've got about 25 minutes left. And if there's any question generated from that, Martyn, if it's an insurance related thing, we can take some more questions at the end. I have said to the delegates, Martyn, that I'm happy to stay a little bit longer after 12 o'clock. So if there are any, insurance related questions, I mean, are you willing to stay a little bit later?
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So what we'll do, Emma, if you can get my slides up, and it is quite basic, but I think sometimes it's good to go back through basic information. Let me just get rid of that. I've got, okay. Right, so it's definitely the basics. Just to say, I'm obviously no specialist knowledge in insurance issues, no expertise at all. These slides are based on the acre information. So there is a Village Halls information sheet number 7, Village Halls insurance cover. There's information sheet 35 is covering trustee liability and trustee indemnity insurance. And these are resources that you can get through RAD. And another good one is number 17, which is trustees' roles and responsibilities, which talks about your legal roles and responsibilities in the governance of the charity. Next page, Emma, please. Right, what is insurance cover? Basically, charity trustees, that's what you are. You are the Village Hall Management Committee, so you are the charity trustees. You have a duty under charity law to insure the charity's assets and liabilities, and may be personally liable if you fail to do so. Most village halls are still unincorporated, so that it means the trustees can be personally liable. So it's just to be aware of that fact. So it doesn't mean that if you had trustee indemnity insurance that you are completely let off the hook. You've still got to follow legal advice, charity advice, follow all the health and safety advice as well. So that's just to be aware of the fact that you are responsible by law and you have to insure the village hall. So that is actually quite common sense. But another thing is you've also got to comply with your charity's governing document. Somebody said earlier about you're a new committee and you've not actually had any paperwork handed over to you as a new committee. This is where you would be put in a very awkward position, because if you don't or haven't even seen the governing document for your charity, you don't really know what the purpose is, what your role is, what the rules and regulations are. So it's essential that you have sight, all the trustees should have sight of the charity's governing document. They're not all the same. So, you know, you may talk to another village hall and they say, yes, this is what we're meant to do. This is what we can do under our governing document. That doesn't mean that yours is exactly the same. So you have to, as a charity trustee, it's your duty of care to actually ask for a copy, which you should have been given anyway when you took on the role, and read it and make sure that you fully understand, because you can't rely on maybe somebody else that's been on the committee a long time who may not have read it, who may not fully understand. So it is your duty to actually make sure that you understand it, and then you know what your role is within that committee. So it's important that insurance, if there's a failure to insure adequately, it is essential to seek professional advice in respect of any specific inquiry. So if you're not sure as a village hall committee, do seek that advice. Like Martyn was saying, the insurance brokers, the insurance companies are only too happy to make sure that you are buying the right sort of product. Next slide, Emma. This is just an illustration of the information that the Charity Commission provides. It's called the Essential Trustee Guide, what you need to know, what you need to do. It was updated, I think, in May 2008. I think that was when it was last updated. The message really from this guidance is to that trustees, being a trustee is a serious responsibility, but it doesn't have to be daunting if you are armed with the right knowledge and understand your legal duties. So if you just look through that jigsaw quickly, those are your key responsibilities. I mean, actually, the Charity Commission website is also a very, very good resource if you're not quite sure. You can get advice from ACRE. As I said, there's the information sheet number 7, which is roles and responsibilities of charity trustees. But also there's on the Charity Commission website, it's public, it's open to the public to view and download any of their resources as well to understand the responsibilities of being a trustee. And to make sure that you are managing it effectively and ensure that the charity delivers the Charities' aims as well. Okay, next slide, Emma. So key thing is know your insurer and know your policy. Like Martyn said, there are, it's advisable to probably go with a bespoke village hall policy, but amongst the policies that are there, they're not identical. They're not all going to be the same. So you've really got to understand what it is that you are buying, talk to the broker and tailor it to the needs that your specific village hall has. Be aware, are you freehold? Do you own the property, the land and property, or is it leasehold? And you'd be surprised how many groups I talk to who don't actually understand whether they own the property that they are managing. So the basics, if you don't understand the basics of your charity, like whether you own it or whether it is a leasehold, these are the things you've got to be sure of. It's going back to the basics. Have you got outbuildings that you've got to be responsible for? Have you got playgrounds, playing fields, play areas? If it is a leasehold, you need to check with your landlord, check what the hall is required to cover. What are you meant to be covering on your policy? And are there certain things that the landlord is covering on his policy? Usually the lease will make the hall responsible for repairing certain types of damage to the hall. Make sure you know what the cover period is provided by the policy as well. Ensure that you are fully aware of that. Are there any restrictions to it? When we're talking about COVID and COVID-19, I think when village hall insurers are looking at your capability of doing risk assessments and making your property COVID secure, they are all endorsing, I believe, the ACRE information and the ACRE guidance. So you as trustees, if you've been following all the information we've been sending out over the last 9 months to do with the safe reopening of the village hall, the ACRE information sheet on reopening and all the appendices that have gone along with that, if you follow that guidance, then the insurance companies will know that you are abiding to the right sort of guidance. They would see that as, the right process that you're following. Next slide, Emma, please. So what is insurance? In simple terms, it's a contract between the policyholder and the insurer. It promises to compensate if you suffer financial loss in certain circumstances, in return for which you would pay that premium to get that cover. That is usually renewed annually. And again, like Martyn said, it's index linked. But if you've had anything that's been added to or anything that's altered or any high cost equipment that you may have, you need to notify the insurance company, which is covered there, where both parties have that obligation that the insurer has a duty to pay out if the conditions of the policy are met. And then obviously things like keeping records, doing your risk assessments, following all the legal requirements that you have as trustees, then you should have met those conditions. And also the obligation of the customer, they have a duty to provide that correct information, to pay the premiums and comply with all the terms and conditions. So again, you need to read the insurance policy and understand what those terms and conditions are. Just paying the premium is not enough. You have to fully understand what it is that you are buying. Again, to reiterate that all the information when you are applying for the policy, you have to put that correct information into the application. And both at the start and must be correct. The information must be correct and current, both at the start and at the time of any claim. Failure to inform insurers of changing circumstances through the life of the policy is offering them a reason to decline or reduce the claim, which applies to any sort of insurance that we may have. Things like extra optional cover might be Oh, sorry. Can we go on to the next slide, Anna? I've gone ahead of myself there. And another thing, if you're unsure about anything, and like Martyn had said, please do contact the insurance provider and check with them. So, for example, at the moment, some centres may be required or asked to be vaccination centres. I don't know whether that's a requirement to notify, but I think it would be wise to notify the insurance company that you may be being required to use it for a different purpose that's not necessarily covered in the policy. And like it was said in David's session about the flood cover, that if it's medium or high risk, if you live in an area that's medium or high risk, it would be a bigger amount to pay for that. It's a higher risk. So again, it's making sure that the insurance company know exactly your circumstances and whether you are in, say, a medium or high risk flood area. I think this term fair representation of risk, it's a legal requirement, isn't it, to give that accurate information so that the underwriting decision is accurate. Yeah, I think we've covered that. This is basic again, types of insurance cover. I'm sure you're aware that obviously essential buildings, usually all risks cover basis, contents on a new for all basis. Talking about employers' liability, it's a legal requirement if you've got paid staff. However, most village halls don't have paid staff. If you've got one cleaner and you're paid, then it is a legal requirement. But if the work has been done by volunteers, then the insurance would also define volunteers as employees, making it compulsory to have employers' liability. So any information, if you need information about this, this would be in the ACRE information sheets, and you can contact us on individual basis if you've got individual inquiries about these. Obviously, talk to your insurance broker, your insurance company as well. Steve is asking, would a self-employed cleaner, shouldn't be, no. Self-employed, they should have their own insurance cover. So I think public liability would probably cover them if anything happened as an incident on the village hall property. But as regards their work, I believe, and I'm sure Martyn will correct me if I'm wrong, if they're self-employed, they should have their own insurance cover on that, because they're independently self-employed. Public liability, obviously, that's essential. Any injury or damage to the hall users, trustees, volunteers, contractors. So I suppose self-employed person would be treated as a contractor. I'm not quite sure in that respect, but they're not volunteers. If they are self-employed, they're not classed as a volunteer. Recommended minimum indemnity of £5 million is the sort of recommended minimum amount. I'm not going to really talk about trustee liability and trustee indemnity because that's quite an in-depth thing. I mean, you can raise questions with Martyn on that one, but basically, when we're talking about the majority of halls that are unincorporated, then you can be personally liable. So you need to be fully aware of what that means. So don't just naturally assume that you are covered by the insurance policy. So there is an information sheet that covers all of those issues separately. So I'm not going to talk about that in depth now. And I think most policies will have legal expenses in case there was, for example, an employment tribunal and the charity is putting at risk for quite high legal expenses. So that is an essential thing to have as well. Next slide, Emma. Right, and also upon renewal of your policy, again, do check with the insurance company, and any changes, obviously you have to identify, but also check with the insurance company if any changes have been made to the policy, because it can work both ways. And I don't know whether the COVID situation or post-COVID, whether there will be any implications with insurance policies. Maybe some of the terms and conditions may change. So when you do renew, I think it's worth asking them what those things, you know, how that will impact on the village hall. So I think we've covered a lot of this really from the earlier sessions. It's the trustees' duty of care to know what they are covered for. You've got to fully understand what your policy is. So read the terms and conditions, and if you don't understand them, ask your insurance company. And failure to meet any terms and conditions could mean losing the protection you believe that you are paying for. So all of those things that are listed there. At all times, you must ensure you are meeting any legal obligations and any health and safety requirements for your hall. So that could be your health and safety, your risk assessments, and any issues you've got to address. Fire safety precautions, food hygiene, data protection, employment law, safeguarding, these sort of things. So it's not just physical things like intangibles like the safeguarding, the data protection. You've got to, you know, you've got to be aware that you are following the legal requirements on those things as well. Next page, Emma. Common insurance related issues. This is where things can go wrong. So the failure as a village hall committee, if you fail to provide the accurate sum assured, which was covered in the David Christie session, when he was talking about if you don't put the right value for a rebuild of your property, you can actually get, in the case of a claim, it's proportionate. So if you are, for example, 30% undervalued, you may then, in the case of a claim, be 30% less than what than what's needed to rebuild that property or to repair that property. Right. Yes, report incidents to the insurer. Anything that's happened, any damage, report it to the insurer. Update the insurer about any changes. We've talked about that. Know who owns what, freehold or leasehold. Report accidents in an accident book. That's a legal requirement to do that. Again, your health and safety requirements. You've got to comply with all the normal standard legal requirements and your risk assessments. Understand your policy documents. We've talked about that. Trustee indemnity. I'm not going to talk about that now, but you've got to be aware that that is an issue that you do need to fully understand. Provide the up-to-date and current contact details for your charity, because if you're not in regular contact with your insurer and the secretary or the main contact has changed, so any correspondence coming from the insurer may go to the wrong person, the wrong address. So make sure you keep them updated if the contact details change for your charity. And any legal problems and disputes against your charity, again, inform the insurer about that. And it's basically, like we have said, just understand what your policy is saying. Next slide, Emma. Yes, David did. We've talked about the underinsurance. I think this is a major issue. Most important aspect is getting the building sum assured correct. So we're talking about the rebuild cost, not the market value, or not the price that the property say it was purchased. It's not that price. It's literally rebuild, including all those additional costs like the demolition, site clearance, professional fees, e.g. architect, project manager, surveyor, etc. And if VAT is going to be an additional cost, then that would have to be factored in as well. And there are quite a few variables on that. So there's information sheet 18 explains a little bit more about the VAT when it comes to rebuild. And your insurance company will advise on that. They would advise you how you would calculate if you had to add on and how much VAT costs would be factored into that sum assured. Next slide. Risk management, 3-step process. So again, when you're doing your risk assessments, identify your risks, analysis of that, what needs to be done about it, how, is it high risk, low risk, minimum, a low risk or medium high, what needs to be done, how you act upon it, what is the cost involved with that. You've got to mitigate that risk, reduce any consequences, any, outcomes, injuries to people and property. And again, it's recording this in your risk assessment. So I'm just going to whiz through that very quickly. Can we go to the next slide, Emma? Yeah. So this is where you can turn to get advice on reducing risks. So the Health and Safety Executive website, you can download a risk assessment guide, which is specifically for village halls. There is also a sample risk assessment guide in the ACRE information sheet on health and safety. That's one of the appendices. So there's lots of information how you actually conduct the risk assessments. Similarly, there's one for fire safety. You'd have to look at health and hygiene. Have you got the right policies and procedures in place covering aspects like the safeguarding, the data protection, handling of money and how you handle your finances, because again, there's a big risk with being financially prudent for the charity. And again, that's your legal duty of care to make sure that you are looking and have a finance procedures in place. Again, there's a lot of legal requirements around managing employees. Security is another big issue as well, and that you will get advice from your insurance company on the insurance security side of it. You get information from the Charity Commission and information from your insurance brokers and providers. So that's just a slide to show you that, there's lots of information out there. ACRE provide, I think there's 42 information sheets in total. So any issue or aspect that you're not sure about, then, do ask. And we're going to send you the list of information sheets out after the event anyway. So anything you're not sure about, there's an information sheet that will provide that answer. And David talked about well-planned maintenance as well. So if you've got a good procedure for whoever carries out the maintenance on the building, again, that will help to avoid any issues further down the line. And you can evidence it in case you do need to make that claim. But it's not just for making a claim, it's for the trustees themselves to know that they are maintaining the hall properly. So I think we are probably finished, Emma. Let's just, I had got a few slides which were showing what Rachel had shown earlier, so we can skim through those. I just got a few slides to show the roadmap to recovery, which Rachel showed in her session this morning. So we'll skip through those. Okay, that's it, yeah. Right, so if we can go to, right, let's see what questions have arisen.
One of the things, Helena, if I can speak, is
Yeah.
COVID and loss of income cover. And I'd just like to pick up on that because when the Supreme Court ruling was announced a few weeks ago, it sounded as if anyone could now claim for business interruption. That is not the case. Most policies exclude business interruption arising from pandemics or from disease generally. And nothing has changed. The Supreme Court ruling related to a specific section of policies. And to my knowledge, well, the ANSVAR policy that we arrange, the Surveyor policy that we arrange, they're not affected by the Supreme Court ruling. There is no cover for loss of income arising from COVID. And I understand that's the same for those who are insured with Aviva as well. I haven't yet found any village hall policy that would cover loss of income arising from COVID, and I don't think there are any out there. But as I say, I was very disappointed with the way the press reported that Supreme Court ruling because it was extremely misleading.
Yeah, I've not had any inquiries about that either, Martyn. So I was surprised that I hadn't been, flooded with people inquiring about that. I think
we were
flooded. You were,
yeah,
yes,
we were,
yeah. Well, they went straight to you then, yes, yeah.
Can I mention something else on the subject of COVID? Because I just want to deal with the issue of a hall being out of use for a long period of time, as many are now. Because normally under all insurance policies, where a hall is out of use for 30 days or more, certain perils are excluded from cover. Things like storm, flood, theft, malicious damage and so on. But because of the unusual situation concerning COVID, most insurers, if not all insurers, are agreeing to waive those requirements, provided that you visit the hall at least once a month, ideally more often, and keep a log of visits, having checked security and looking for leaks and so on and so forth. So you must visit at least once a month, or alternatively, work from the hall for one full day every month, which isn't usually an option. But it really is important you check with your insurer what those requirements are. If you're insured with ANSVAR via ourselves, look at our website, villagehallinsurance.co.uk, and all the details are on the landing page. But it is very important that you not only visit the hall, but keep a log of visits to establish that you have done that.
We're in lockdown, so halls are required to close, like you're talking about unoccupied, if they're not providing an exempt activity. But when I know some halls between the lockdowns still decided that they didn't feel safe or confident to reopen. So even legally, if a hall could reopen, but they chose not to, did that affect the insurance in any way, or would that still be treated as unoccupied?
It's still treated as unoccupied.
It's just treated as
it was still treated so. I mean, insurers did waive certain requirements, but the inspection rule remained. Mainly because, of course, there could be something like a burst pipe, and if you don't spot it within the first day or so, it could cause far more damage than if you spot it. So that's the reason why insurers impose those rules, but do check the position under your own policy.
Oh, it's interesting to know that, yes, yeah.
I understand as well, there was a question earlier, sorry. I understand there was a question about whether, as a result of COVID, insurance premiums are likely to rise. And the answer to that is premiums are likely to rise, but not necessarily as a result of COVID, because most insurers don't cover consequences. But we're entering what's known as a hard market, where the number of suppliers is reducing. All sorts of reasons for that, but premiums are likely to start to increase, not dramatically, but certainly to some extent. One of the ways you can combat that is to take out a long-term undertaking, and most of our village hall policyholders are on a 3-year long-term undertaking, so they commit to remain with that insurer for 3 years, and we give a discount of 15% to compensate for that. And if you're under a long-term agreement, the premium rate, the underlying premium rate, won't increase. The premium itself may, because the sums insured will be index linked, and there may be changes to the policy which cause an increase, but the underlying premium rate won't increase.
Yeah. So I would imagine it's, as you say, it's a hard market. It must be extremely difficult for insurance companies with the amount of the weather changing, the increase in flooding and severe weather conditions. Presumably, Martyn, that's the reason why it's much harder business to be in, and much more competitive and difficult to survive, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. Brexit's one of the things that's affecting it. But we've been in a soft market for a good long time now, 15 years as a minimum, in which, you know, the supply of insurance exceeds the demand, and so the premium rates are low. But that's changing, as I say, and you will see a change going forward.
Okay, well, people are leaving slowly now, so we have gone past 12 o'clock. Any last questions, opportunity while we have Martyn here?
Sorry, can I raise one other thing? Because it's something that you mentioned on the subject of vaccination centres. A lot of our halls are being used as vaccination centres. The only thing I'd ask is if you're one of those halls, do tell your insurer. What they'll want to know is if you're using any of your own volunteers and what roles those volunteers are fulfilling. Because they just want to make sure that you're doing all you can, carrying out risk assessment and so on, to protect the volunteers in your control.
Going to a question, when I was doing my session, I had to rush it rather and not explain things in full, and I wasn't sure of the answer about if somebody's self-employed, would that not be included on the employer's liability insurance? Because officially they should have their own insurance.
Yes, they should. Yeah. No, it would normally come under public liability. So if you have a contractor to clean the hall and they're injured on the premises, that'll be covered. But yeah, I should say they're injured on the premises as a result of your negligence, because that's always the requirement. That would be covered under the public liability section of the policy, not the employer's liability.
On the public liability, not the employer's liability. That's
and as you said, they should have their own insurance, really. They should hold their own insurance.
It's a very difficult area, isn't it? They should, if they're self-employed. Yeah. Right, I'm glad we've clarified that. That's useful to know. Okay.
Helena,
there's very few of us left now, so yeah.
I think Steve Wood, you had a question. You had your hand up earlier. Have you got a question, Steve?
It was on the broader aspect of COVID, and obviously to reopen a hall as we did between the lockdowns to hire us, we had to make sure it was COVID safe with, you know, putting up notices, having hands sanitizers, deep clean, etc., etc. Is there any situation where we would say somebody said, oh, I came to your hall and caught COVID there, and you hadn't cleaned it properly, or you hadn't put the right notices up for social distancing, and, you know, I'm going to pursue you for a claim against COVID? Is that, I don't know if it's ever happened, or would public liability cover that sort of pursuance?
It's a question we've had. Sorry, Helen. Do carry on.
No, you go ahead, Martyn. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's a question we've had a lot, and our understanding is that it would be covered under public liability were it to arise, but let's put it another way, you would be defended under public liability by the insurer, but I think it would be almost impossible for someone to prove that that's where they've contracted the illness. So I don't think a successful claim could be made, but the insurers would defend you to prove that that was the case.
Okay, I think a village hall committee, as long as they are COVID secure, they're if you're confident that you've put all the measures in place, then I think there's very little to be concerned about on that, because like Martyn said, you would be defended because you've done everything that's required of you as a village hall committee. I mean, if you'd failed to follow all the information and the ACRE guidance, and I think we've identified that, and Martyn will agree, that if you follow the ACRE guidance, then they are satisfied that, you know, that you're following the best advice for reopening. So it would be very difficult for an individual to prove where they caught COVID from. So I think it's, as you say, people are concerned about that, but I don't think it's something that you should be too concerned about, as long as you've put those measures in place.
Yeah, no, I mean,
and your
we followed that.
hirers, yeah, but also the hirers, yeah, hirers need to sign the hiring agreement, and it's their responsibility as hirers to make sure that their group that's going to use the hall fully follows the COVID rules as well. So it's a two-way thing. They have responsibilities from hiring the hall as much as you have responsibilities to provide that facility. So it works both ways.
Yeah, and we added some supplementary hiring conditions and a copy of our COVID risk assessment to the hire agreement. So I think we're pretty well covered, even if somebody tried to prove they caught it there, which would be difficult, I think. Okay, thank you.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. So I think it's a good opportunity, unless it's a last minute question, a good opportunity to thank Martyn. I think the numbers have gone down, but thank you, Martyn, for joining us.